guess I'm supposed to just start. I'm just going to jump in here. I'm going to share my screen here and hope everything works out. And everybody, video and sound off. Okay, this presentation is about a community engagement project known as MCRC. We will begin with a very short promo of what the MCRC project is. The Mourning the Creation of Racial Categories project, or the MCRC project, partners with the creative and performing arts to tell the stories of how racial categories such as Asian, Black, and White were created. The MCRC project makes the case that the ways in which people came to be divided into racial categories is something to be mourned.
Swatches of skin matched to meaning, swaddled by a category.
This idea of race has been in our history for the past 400 years, yet we truly don't understand it.
Go, Archie, go! If not for your sake, go for mine!
Everyone is affected and everyone has something to mourn.
All Americans share in this history of being classified and divided into unequally valued categories. That classification begins at birth and shapes our lives in profound ways until we die. The MCRC project uses the arts to guide our country in mourning. Mourning does not involve being crippled by sadness. Rather, mourning is the acknowledgement that this wasn't right. Mourning allows us to see the wounds and weights of centuries that people in each category carry around in different ways today. The MCRC project prepares us to rethink our identities and understand race in a new way so we can begin the work of healing. To date, the MCRC project has made 3 films to help us understand the experiences of being divided into different racial categories. Our first film, The Categories Black and White, is on the KET PBS website. A clip from that film illustrates the appearances of people who were legally assigned to the Black category. This slide shows a color line marking a point where white separated itself from Black. The range of complexion shades on the right side of the color line tell us that people labeled as Black have been deliberately separated from family members who are white, those on the left side. In other words, the people in the Black category have white ancestors, but were rejected, abandoned, or left behind by the white category. The MCRC project does not tell the entire story of race. It places the focus on how we were divided into what appears to be a neat checklist of categories. This is a checklist we are all familiar with. Just think, we apply these categories to the 330 million people who live in the US and the 7.7 billion people that live in the world. To get people into racial categories, our country pushed and pulled thousands of cultures into each category, as illustrated in the following examples. For example, to make the Native American category, our country pushed 2,000 tribal groups into one category. Look at the diversity of appearances within this category. The stereotypical image in the top center asks us to believe that this categorical label tells us something about the people who make it up. As a second example, to make the white category, our country pushed people from 61 European and Middle Eastern countries into one category. I know many of you might be saying, this is a long story, might be saying, what? How is Middle East in the white category? This is a long story, how Middle East is considered white by definition, but I can tell you it has to do with where Jesus was born. To make the Asian category, our country pushed people from 63 countries into one category. To get people into racial categories, our country also separated ancestors and descendants. And it divided friendships, as illustrated in this next video.
3 servants run away together. Another way to divide was to punish people differently for the same crime. The best known example occurred in 1640, when the Virginia General Court decided the punishments for 3 servants who ran away together from their master. The said 3 servants shall receive 30 stripes or lashes apiece. The Dutchman Victor and the Scot Gregory shall have 4 years added to their terms of servitude. The third, being a Negro named John Punch, shall serve his master for the time of his natural life. How would different punishments for the same crime impact friendships? One is enslaved for life. John Punch is the first documented person in the English colonies to be sentenced to enslavement for life. Handed down in 1640, his sentence marks the start of the terrible transformation, the process by which enslavement was imposed specifically on African peoples and their descendants.
We can begin to heal racial divides when we become aware of how we were divided. To do this, we must know how racial categories were created. Next slide. The MCRC's project mission is to tell how we were divided. 97 students and faculty across 17 disciplines have contributed artistic talents to make this mission come alive and to emotionally engage audiences. Next slide. We now offer a sample of our work from another film, Let Our Loss Be Heard. This clip introduces you to the Garner family story, which is set in 1856. You will see how the family is caught between the categories Black and white, and how they were destroyed by the dividing power of racial categories and the legal system that makes those categories matter. Next slide.
About 10 o'clock on Sunday night, a party of 8 slaves belonging to Archibald K. Gaines and John Marshall of Richwood Station, Boone County, Kentucky, about 16 miles from Covington, escaped by horse and sleigh. 3 are Robert Garner, his mother Mary, and his father Simon. They are the property of Marshall. The other 5, the property of Gaines, are Robert's 21-year-old pregnant wife, Margaret, and her 4 children, Thomas, age 6, Samuel, age 4, Mary, age 2, and Scylla 9 months. The news accounts describe Margaret as about 5 feet 3 inches in height, a mulatto showing from 1/4 to 1/3 white blood. The boys are bright-eyed and woolly-headed. The youngest boy is mulatto. Scylla, the 9-month-old, is light enough to show a red tinge in her cheeks. Mary was almost white and was a little girl of rare beauty. The 8 rode in the sleigh to the riverbank, where they walked over the frozen Ohio River into Cincinnati. Mr. Gaines, springing on a horse, followed in pursuit. After a few hours of diligent inquiry, Gaines learned that his slaves were in a house about 1/4 of a mile below the Mill Creek Bridge on River Road. On reaching the house, officers attempted to force the door open. A window was suddenly thrown up. Robert presented a pistol and fired 3 times, wounding 1 deputy. During the affray, Margaret had struck her infant Scylla on the head with a fire shovel with the intention of taking her life. She slashed at the 2 boys, giving one a 4-inch gash to his throat and the other a gash to his head. The 2-year-old lay on the floor dead with her throat slashed. Mr. Gaines, the master, picked up the dead child and was in the act of carrying her off when objections were made to the body being removed before an inquest was held. He at length surrendered the child. The mother of the dead child acknowledges she killed it, and that her determination was to have killed all the children and then destroy herself rather than return to slavery.
You might be thinking that if only the family made it to freedom, they would have stayed safe and stayed together. But the way categories work, the family never had a chance to stay together. Now you will hear the poem entitled The Ohio River, in which one of the Garner children expresses his fear of what will happen to his family if they made it to freedom. He knows that they will be separated because of their racial appearances. Next slide.
Healing from trauma begins with the telling of repressed stories.
The Ohio River. Our feet left the snow and slid onto a sheet of ice. I turned to retreat, but Mama clenched my arm. Her fingers indented my skin. She bent her womb-filled body to level with my eye, and with venom and a strand of desperation, she repeated, "Walk." The babies were swaddled, their faces pressed to breast. There their tears slipped and their cries were smothered. Sam held onto my hand and pressed every time the ice veined beneath us. My hand began to throb, but I didn't dare tell him to let go. Mama's ankle disappeared from the surface, and as she fell, her shrieks only subsided into ceaseless moans. They beat at the ice until her foot resurfaced. Through shivering shudders, I pleaded, "What are we walking for?" And with a tone just as brittle as the ice, Father looks through me and says, "For freedom, boy." Until I could feel him look away, I held my tongue in obedience and bowed my head in submission. Then I watched as those desperate bodies wearied across the ice. I pitied the color of them, the weight of them. I wondered, what were we going to do with freedom? Would freedom even look right on us? I pictured them in freedom. I pictured them on a sunny day in freedom, youth restored, and the kids circling at their feet for sugary sweets. I saw them in freedom. And then I saw everyone watching them. Everyone else saw what I saw. I looked down at my brother's hand, wrapped so needlingly around mine. Would he be like this in freedom? Would he still need me in freedom? The kids used to joke that he wasn't really my brother, that Mary and Scylla weren't really my sisters. Would I lose them in freedom? I should have known that freedom was the ice giving out, giving us a way out. We just had to keep stomping on it is all. We should have fallen through. We should have fallen deep into freedom.
The Ohio River poem was from the perspective of one of the Garner's sons. And that poem was really supposed to highlight the perspective of a child who's not viewing freedom the way that society has gotten used to viewing freedom, which is something to be yearned for. And the only reason why he views it in such a negative way, and the line that's in the poem is this what freedom looks like, is because he sees that in this yearning for freedom, it literally it led his family to disaster. And so he just thought that, well, maybe this wasn't worth it, and even if we had it, we still wouldn't fit in freedom because we're still separated by our racial appearances.
In this next clip, titled, "Were You There?" you will meet actors and dancers who played the characters of the Gardner family. In this scene, you will see Margaret kill one of her children, Mary. Then you will see Archibald and Robert struggle over the dead child's body. Keep in mind, Archibald is both the biological father and owner of Mary, but Robert is her father figure. Play clip.
Scene 4. Were you there? Margaret concludes that the only way she can protect her children from the horrors of enslavement is to kill them. In the chaos, she is able to kill only one of her children, Mary.
Were you there when she pierced the baby's neck? Were you there when she slashed the child's head? Oh, we made the children crumble, crumble, crumble. Were you there when she pierced the baby's neck? Were you there? Were you there? Were you there when she had to kill her child? Were you there trees tumble, tumble, tumble. Were you there when she had to kill her child? Were you there? Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. We were there, and we lost the child. We were there. We were there, and we crucified the child. We were there.
Were you there? Is a question that guided us through this scene. Not because any of us were physically there that day that Margaret killed her daughter, but we were there because the same categorical system that destroyed the Garner family has carried on into today's time. Next slide. This categorical system is built on a long history of emotions and reactions that range from crucifying and sacrificing children to the execution of civilians by police force. All of these acts further cemented the categorical system. Next slide. And we were there because we are still using the same categorical model that resulted in Margaret taking matters into her own hands. Matters that led her to kill herself and her children rather than return to slavery. In this next slide, we'll be showing you the image of George Floyd's suffocation. And we're using this image to say that the Garner family story was a tragedy that caught our country's attention in similar ways to the killing of George Floyd by an officer. The Garner family and George Floyd stories are not isolated ones. We can safely say that for every year, for over 400 years, there is a story with a similar emotional intensity. And these stories are like an avalanche running up to the present. We were there because today, we are still using the same categorical model that places the white category at the top of the hierarchy, a placement that gives a police officer the confidence and feeling of superiority to press his knee down on a Black man's neck for over 8 minutes and kill him. Next slide. The Floyd stories are about ripping people apart and positioning them into opposing racial categories. The stories are about actions that reinforce made divisions. These stories are evidence of how the categorical system invades relationships. Next slide. The next clip is the poem That Time I Talked to Race. When listening, keep in mind that it is personified. You will hear race taking credit for the havoc the categories have created and taking pride in the fact that these categories divide people and destroy relationships. Play clip.
That time I talked to race. It's hard to bury something that never really died. I find him hiding in my cupboard between the spaghetti sauce and sauerkraut after he's eaten my family tree. You know me, he says, perching himself on a wine glass. I built muscle carrying broken bone ancestor into separate rooms where they didn't age well. I tasted secret grandfathers from Japan, the great Cherokee aunts forced to wait on the porches of homogeneous household. I am the strained smile at the grocery store, the one-winged butterfly in a dark-skinned stomach. I even filled the space between the mixed race classmate, the elephant inside the whiteboard. But no one thinks to look for me there. Instead, they take blood samples, cranial measurements, x-rays, grab body parts from the boxes I lured their fathers into and call them history. He looks like me. I realize that's the story ends, but really doesn't. And it's only 2 months later, when he has woven himself into the living room rug, that I wonder how many other houses he's staying in.
That poem is really kind of a conversation between the speaker and the race concept in the US. And it's sort of indicative of multiple conversations, many millions of conversations that have happened like through America's history and that have kind of led to the separation and loss that we've experienced while trying to define ourselves and what categories mean. And I kind of used a lot of gruesome metaphors to explain like all of those separations that have happened, like body parts being in boxes, things aging. It's sort of all of the violence, not even just physical violence, like metaphorical and mental violence that kind of happens when you disconnect from your own history and when your ancestors have to disconnect from you.
After listening to the poem that personifies race as a character, we can imagine how race would claim credit for the George Floyd murder. Race would proudly claim. Next slide. I am the silence of the unidentified cop standing off to the side. I am the screams of the onlookers. I am the invisible line no one could cross to help. I am the panic of the officer's knee pressing to subdue and control. I am George Floyd's plea. I can't breathe. Next slide.
For more information, just visit the website, the MCRC project. I will mention that we have 2 films that are pretty close to completion where we look at the white category. We personify the category white in these films. One is titled Why White and the other is I'm White Like You, Right, Mom? A few takeaways that I hope are relevant for this conference. MCRC is committed to expressing the depths of concepts such as implicit bias, racism, and white supremacy. Our hope is to emotionally engage audiences with these very complicated terms. What we do is, in the kind of things that we make and create, we focus on families breaking apart, ancestors and descendants estranged, friendships severed, specifically the white leaving behind relationships it most values. We focus on stories where people wrestle with their category, wrestle with keeping race out of their relationship with a valued person of another racial classification. We focus on moments when people believe that they are unquestionably good and do not realize that they are part of something socially, culturally, and spiritually destructive. We focus on how the past invades the present. Thank you, and I think we can take questions.
Thank you, Joan and India. We have a few minutes for questions before we need to transition. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to unmute your mic, introduce yourself, and let us know what question you would like answered. This is a lot of information to take in. So I think if what we can do is we can just sit here and enjoy the silence. And if any questions do come up, we will be here for them. You're also welcome to transition out of our breakout and back into the larger room to prepare for the 3 p.m. session. But like I mentioned, we'll just sit here and wait to see if there are any questions. And then if not, we'll close it up and transition to the next part of this event. Thank you all for coming.